Lieutenant James Leach crouched behind his M10 tank destroyer on a foggy hillside near Arracourt, France, watching the morning mist slowly lift from the valley below. It was September 19, 1944, and somewhere in that gray soup, an entire German Panzer brigade was advancing. 60 tanks, maybe more, including the dreaded Panthers, with their sloped armor and powerful 75mm guns that could kill an American Sherman from a mile away. Leach's unconventional positioning, his 3 tank destroyers angled at 45 degrees on the hillside in a staggered formation, had been called suicide by fellow officers just days earlier. "You'll expose your flanks," they'd warned. "German gunners will pick you apart." But Leach had studied the terrain, calculated the angles, and understood something his critics didn't. By positioning his TDs at extreme angles on elevated ground, he created overlapping kill zones that would catch German tanks in a deadly crossfire, while his own vehicles remained hull down and difficult to target. Now, as the fog thinned and the distinctive silhouettes of Panther tanks emerged just 800 yards away, Leach keyed his radio and whispered the words his crew had been waiting for. "Targets front. Panthers. Engage when ready." In the next 12 hours, this young lieutenant's crazy ambush angle would destroy 7 German tanks and help save an entire American division. This is the story of tactical innovation, courage under fire, and the forgotten battle that proved sometimes the best defense is an unexpected angle of attack. By September 1944, the Allied advance across France had created a dangerous situation that few civilians back home understood. Following the spectacular breakout from Normandy in August, General George S. Patton's Third Army had raced across France so quickly that it outran its supply lines. Patton's armor reached the Moselle River in eastern France by early September, penetrating deep into the Lorraine region, just miles from the German border. But this rapid advance created a vulnerable salient. American forces were stretched thin, low on gasoline and ammunition, with exposed flanks and limited reserves. The German High Command recognized this opportunity. Adolf Hitler, desperate to reverse the Allied momentum and protect the industrial Saar region just across the German border, ordered a massive counteroffensive. The newly reorganized 5th Panzer Army, equipped with the latest Panther and Tiger tanks, would strike at the overstretched American positions near the town of Arracourt, aiming to cut off and destroy Patton's spearhead units. If successful, this counterattack could delay the Allied advance by months and potentially change the war's trajectory in the West. The armored units defending this sector were primarily from the 4th Armored Division, one of Patton's best formations, but they were exhausted from weeks of continuous combat and critically short of fuel and ammunition. Supporting them were tank destroyer battalions, specialized units equipped with M10 and M18 tank destroyers, vehicles built around the doctrine that mobility and firepower could defeat heavier German tanks. The M10 Wolverine mounted a 3-inch (76.2mm) gun on an open-topped turret built on a Sherman chassis. It was fast, maneuverable, and packed a decent punch, but its armor was thin, designed to avoid hits rather than absorb them. Against German Panthers, which mounted 75mm guns and had frontal armor over 80mm thick, American tank destroyers needed every advantage: surprise, positioning, and superior tactics. The official doctrine called for tank destroyers to operate in mobile reserve, rushing to threatened sectors to ambush advancing enemy armor. But the static nature of the Arracourt defensive positions meant TD crews would have to fight from prepared positions, something they'd trained for but rarely executed in actual combat. The German forces assembling for the counteroffensive represented some of the Wehrmacht's finest remaining armored units. The 5th Panzer Army included the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, equipped with Panther Ausf G tanks, the latest variant of Germany's most effective medium tank. The Panther had proven itself superior to the American Sherman in nearly every engagement. Its sloped armor was virtually impenetrable from the front at combat ranges. Its 75mm KK-42 L-70 gun could penetrate any Allied tank, and its optical rangefinding equipment gave German crews a significant advantage in long-range engagements. Supporting the Panthers were Tiger I heavy tanks, Stug III assault guns, and mechanized infantry in half-tracks. German planners expected this force to overwhelm the Americans through superior firepower and armor protection. What they didn't anticipate was that the Americans would use terrain, tactics, and innovation to negate Germany's technological advantages. The stage was set for one of WWI's most significant yet least known armored battles, a contest that would showcase how tactical ingenuity could overcome superior equipment. Lieutenant James Leach was not a typical armor officer. The 24-year-old from Pennsylvania had been a civil engineering student before the war, and he approached tactical problems with a mathematician's precision and an engineer's eye for terrain. Assigned to the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion attached to the 4th Armored Division, Leach had spent the weeks since Normandy studying every tank engagement, analyzing why some American units succeeded while others were destroyed. He'd observed that tank destroyers fighting from conventional positions, hull down behind berms or in tree lines, often failed because German gunners knew exactly where to look for them. Panthers could engage from ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, and their superior optics meant German crews often spotted American TDs before being spotted themselves. Leach became convinced that unconventional positioning was the key to survival and success. Leach's ambush angle concept evolved from his understanding of geometry and ballistics. Rather than positioning his 3 M10s in a straight line behind cover, the conventional approach, he proposed placing them on hillsides at 45-degree angles to the expected German avenue of approach, staggered in depth so each TD could cover the others. This created several advantages. First, any German tank entering the kill zone would be exposed to fire from multiple angles simultaneously, making it difficult for enemy crews to identify and engage all threats. Second, the angled positioning meant that if a German tank rotated its turret to engage one TD, it exposed its side armor to the others. Third, the elevated positions gave American gunners better observation and the ability to shoot down into thinner German tank roof armor. Finally, the non-standard positions would confuse German gunners expecting to find American armor in conventional defensive positions. When Leach presented his tactical concept to his battalion commander in early September, the reception was skeptical at best. Experienced officers pointed out the obvious problems. Angled positions would expose the TD side armor, normally kept hidden from enemy fire. The staggered placement would make mutual support more difficult and complicate command and control. Moving TDs onto hillsides would make them visible from greater distances. Most seriously, if the position was overrun, the TDs would have limited escape routes. The conventional wisdom was that tank destroyers should remain mobile, hidden, and ready to withdraw if threatened, not locked into exposed hillside positions. But Leach persisted, arguing that the geometry of his approach would actually protect his vehicles better than conventional positioning. He requested permission to test the concept in training exercises, and, reluctantly, his commander agreed. The training exercises, conducted in mid-September near rear area positions, demonstrated that Leach's concept had merit. Using friendly Sherman tanks playing the role of German Panthers, the exercises showed that the angled, elevated positions allowed the TDs to engage multiple targets rapidly while presenting difficult shots to enemy gunners. The elevation advantage meant that even when enemy tanks spotted the TDs, they struggled to achieve first-round hits against targets positioned on hillsides with limited backgrounds. Most convincingly, the exercises showed that German tanks entering the overlapping kill zones were almost immediately disabled by fire from multiple TDs before they could effectively respond. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davidson, was impressed enough to authorize Leach to implement his tactics with his 3-vehicle platoon when real combat came. Nobody expected that combat to arrive quite so soon. On September 18, 1944, American intelligence detected massive German armored movements east of Arracourt. Reconnaissance aircraft reported columns of tanks, estimated at over 100 vehicles, moving toward American positions under cover of darkness. The 5th Panzer Army's counteroffensive was beginning. Throughout the night of September 1819, American units went on full alert. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, holding the sector around Arracourt, had approximately 50 Sherman tanks and supporting units spread across a 15-mile front against an estimated German force more than twice that size with superior individual tanks. Tank destroyer battalions, including the 704th, moved into pre-selected defensive positions. Lieutenant Leach's platoon, consisting of 3 M10s with their 15-man crews, was assigned to defend a critical hill overlooking the main road from Coincourt, a likely German approach route. Leach personally selected the positions for his 3 TDs on Hill 318 east of Arracourt. The hill rose approximately 200 feet above the surrounding countryside, offering excellent observation of the valley and approaches. Most importantly, its slopes were gentle enough for tracked vehicles but steep enough to provide hull-down positions at multiple elevations. Leach positioned his 3 M10s, which his crew had nicknamed Angler, Ambush, and Assassin, at staggered heights on the hillside, each angled approximately 45 degrees to the expected enemy approach axis. The highest TD was positioned 150 yards behind and 100 yards left of the lowest, with the 3rd TD between them but offset to the right. This created a triangular formation with overlapping fields of fire covering a kill zone approximately 800 yards deep and 600 yards wide. Each TD was positioned hull down with only its turret visible, and the crews had carefully cleared fields of fire while leaving intervening vegetation to break up their silhouettes. As dawn broke on September 19th, thick fog blanketed the Lorraine countryside, a meteorological advantage for the Germans. Panzer commanders preferred fighting in fog or limited visibility because it negated Allied air superiority and reduced the range advantage of American artillery spotters. At approximately 0630 hours, Leach and his crews heard the distinctive rumble of heavy tracked vehicles approaching from the east. The sound grew louder, and through breaks in the fog, the lead scouts reported movement in the valley below. Then, as the morning sun began burning off the fog, the shapes materialized. Panthers, lots of them. Elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade were advancing in column formation up the Coincourt Road, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Leach counted at least a dozen Panthers in the lead element, with more vehicles, probably Stugs or more Panthers, behind them in the mist. Leach watched through his binoculars as the German column advanced with textbook precision. The Panthers were moving in a tactical formation now, maintaining 50-yard intervals, turrets traversing to scan for threats. The German commander clearly didn't expect opposition this far forward. The Panthers were advancing at moderate speed, not the cautious, buttoned-up approach they would use in suspected ambush zones. This was exactly what Leach had hoped for. He keyed his radio and transmitted a brief message to his other 2 TDs. Targets identified, Panthers, 12+, range 800, hold fire until my command. His gunner, Corporal Mike Reynolds, already had the lead Panther in his sights, adjusting for range and the downward angle. The loader, Private Joe Martinez, had an armor-piercing round chambered and another ready. The driver kept the engine idling quietly, ready to reposition if necessary. Every man in all 3 crews understood that the next few minutes would determine whether they survived the day or joined the casualty lists. At precisely 0705 hours, when the lead Panther had penetrated deepest into the kill zone and the column was stretched out below, Leach gave the order, "Fire!" 3 3-inch guns spoke almost simultaneously. The reports echoed across the hillside, and 3 armor-piercing rounds streaked toward their targets at over 2,600 feet per second. Reynolds' round struck the lead Panther on the side turret, penetrating the 40mm armor and detonating inside. The Panther lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the hatches. The second TD hit a Panther near the middle of the column, its round penetrating the engine deck and setting the power plant ablaze. The third TD's shot struck a Panther's track, immobilizing it. In 3 seconds, 3 German tanks were out of action, and the entire column ground to a confused halt. The German response was immediate but disorganized. Panther commanders frantically tried to locate the firing positions, their turrets traversing wildly as they searched the hillsides. But Leach's angled positioning created exactly the confusion he'd intended. German gunners couldn't immediately determine whether they were being engaged from one position or multiple positions, or exactly where those positions were. While the Germans searched, Leach's 3 TDs continued firing in a carefully coordinated sequence. Each TD would fire, then immediately shift position slightly using their tracks to move 10-15 yards, presenting a different target aspect before firing again. This constant micro-movement, combined with the smoke and dust from their guns, made it extremely difficult for German gunners to achieve accurate return fire. Within 2 minutes of the first shots, Leach's platoon had destroyed or immobilized 5 Panthers. The German column was in chaos. Disabled tanks blocked the road, surviving Panthers were maneuvering to find covered positions, and German infantry were dismounting from half-tracks to seek cover. But now the Germans began to reorganize. An experienced Panther commander identified the approximate location of at least 1 American TD and directed 3 Panthers to concentrate fire on that position. Their 75mm guns opened up, sending high explosive and armor-piercing rounds toward the hillside. Most shots missed, impacting on the slope below or above the TDs, but several came dangerously close. One round struck just feet from Assassin, showering the crew with dirt and shrapnel. The TD commander, Sergeant Bill Morrison, was wounded by fragments but stayed at his post. The battle intensified as more German tanks arrived, responding to the engagement. A Tiger I heavy tank appeared, its massive 88mm gun searching for targets. The Tiger's thick armor, up to 100mm on the front, was virtually impenetrable to the M10's 3-inch gun at ranges over 500 yards, and its 88mm gun could destroy any American vehicle with a single hit. Leach immediately recognized the threat and radioed instructions to concentrate fire on the Tiger. All 3 M10s began firing at the massive tank, aiming for its side armor, which was thinner and more vulnerable. The first 2 rounds bounced off or impacted ineffectively, but the third, fired by Reynolds from Angler, penetrated the Tiger's side armor near the engine, starting a fire that forced the crew to abandon the vehicle. It was an incredible shot, threading the needle between the Tiger's thick frontal armor and its still formidable side protection. By 7:30 hours, Leach's platoon had been in continuous combat for 25 minutes and had expended over half their ammunition. 7 German tanks lay destroyed or immobilized in the valley, 5 Panthers, 1 Tiger, and 1 Stug 3 assault gun. But the Germans were adapting. Recognizing that direct frontal assault into the American kill zone was suicide, the Panzer commander began maneuvering around the flanks, attempting to get behind the American positions where the M10's light armor would be fatally vulnerable. Leach spotted this movement and faced a critical decision: stay in position and risk being flanked, or withdraw to secondary positions. Standard doctrine called for withdrawal, but Leach recognized that abandoning Hill 318 would open the road to Arracourt and potentially unhinge the entire American defensive line. Leach made a calculated gamble. He would keep 2 TDs in their original positions to continue engaging the Germans from the front, while moving 1 TD, Ambush, to cover the threatened flank. This was extremely risky because it meant splitting his already small force and reducing the overlapping fire coverage that made his ambush angle effective. But it was necessary. Corporal Jack Thompson, commanding ambush, acknowledged the order and began moving his vehicle laterally across the hillside toward a position that would cover the eastern approach. As Thompson's M10 moved, it was briefly silhouetted against the skyline, a fatal mistake. A German Panther commander spotted the movement, rapidly calculated the lead angle, and fired. The 75mm armor-piercing round struck ambush on the side hull, penetrating the thin armor and detonating inside. The M10 shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from the open turret. Thompson and two of his crew managed to bail out, but the driver and loader were killed instantly. The loss of 1 TD and 2 men hit Leach hard, but there was no time for grief. The German flanking force, 3 Panthers, was now just 600 yards from the remaining American positions and closing. Leach ordered his 2 remaining M10s to shift fire to the flanking threat. What followed was some of the most intense close-range tank combat of the Lorraine campaign. The 2 M10s and 3 Panthers exchanged fire at ranges under 500 yards, where armor advantages became less decisive and crew skill dominated. Leach's gunner Reynolds destroyed one Panther with a shot through the turret ring that jammed the German turret and forced the crew to abandon. The other M10, Assassin, despite its wounded commander, managed to disable a second Panther with a shot that destroyed its track and optics, leaving it immobile and blind. The third Panther, realizing it was now isolated and under fire from 2 directions, reversed rapidly down the slope and withdrew. By 800 hours, the German attack in this sector had stalled. The road was blocked by burning tanks, German infantry were pinned down by American small arms fire, and the Panzer commander had lost track of how many tanks he'd committed versus how many remained operational. Unknown to Leach, his small 3D platoon had engaged elements of an entire Panzer company, approximately 18 tanks, and had destroyed or disabled 7 of them while losing only 1 American vehicle. More importantly, the fierce resistance had convinced the German commander that he was facing a much stronger force than reality, causing him to call for reinforcements before resuming the attack. This delay gave American artillery time to register on the German positions, and within minutes, 105mm and 155mm shells began falling on the stalled German column, adding to the chaos and destruction. The Battle of Arracourt continued for several more days, with German forces making repeated attempts to break through American positions. But the initial repulse on September 19th, to which Leach's platoon contributed significantly, set the tone for the entire engagement. German commanders became cautious, their attacks less coordinated, their confidence shaken by the unexpected ferocity and effectiveness of American resistance. By September 29, when the battle finally wound down, the 5th Panzer Army had lost over 280 tanks, including many precious Panthers and Tigers, while the 4th Armored Division had lost approximately 48 tanks, an exchange rate that clearly favored the Americans. The failure at Arracourt ended German hopes of a successful counteroffensive in Lorraine and secured Patton's gains, allowing the Third Army to eventually push into Germany itself. Lieutenant Leach's actions on September 19 earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second-highest military decoration. The citation specifically mentioned his innovative tactical positioning and courageous leadership under fire, which resulted in the destruction of 7 enemy tanks and the repulse of a superior enemy force. His 2 surviving crew commanders, Sergeant Morrison and the gunner Reynolds, received Silver Stars. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, who had initially been skeptical of the ambush angle concept, became one of its strongest advocates, ordering other platoons to study and adopt Leach's techniques. Within weeks, the angled, elevated ambush position became standard doctrine for tank destroyer units operating in defensive positions throughout the European theater. The success of Leach's tactics at Arracourt provided valuable lessons that influenced American armor doctrine for the remainder of the war and beyond. First, it demonstrated that inferior equipment could defeat superior equipment through innovative tactics and superior crew training. The M10, with its thin armor and less powerful gun, was technically outmatched by the Panther in virtually every measurable category. Yet, Leach's crews consistently defeated Panthers through better positioning, coordination, and marksmanship. Second, it proved that terrain could be a more effective form of protection than armor plate. By using elevation, angles, and hull-down positions creatively, Leach made his TDs extremely difficult targets despite their thin armor. Third, the battle showed that psychological factors, confusion, surprise, uncertainty, could be as decisive as firepower in armored combat. Army analysts who studied the Arracourt engagements identified several key factors in American success beyond just Leach's innovations. American crews had superior situational awareness because their TD commanders typically fought with heads exposed, using binoculars and direct observation, while German Panther crews often fought buttoned up for protection, limiting their visibility. American tank destroyers were more mechanically reliable than German Panthers, which suffered from transmission problems and required extensive maintenance. American logistics were superior, ensuring that ammunition and fuel were available when needed, while German units often attacked with insufficient supplies. Finally, American tactical flexibility, the willingness of junior officers like Leach to improvise and adapt rather than rigidly following doctrine, proved decisive in a fluid, fast-moving battle. The Germans, for their part, drew different lessons from Arracourt. German after-action reports emphasized the need for better reconnaissance before attacks, more artillery support to suppress American anti-tank weapons, and better coordination between tanks and infantry. Some reports complained about mechanical unreliability of Panthers and insufficient training time for replacement crews, factors that would only worsen as Germany's situation deteriorated in 1945. Interestingly, few German reports identified the specific American tactical innovations that had proven so effective, instead attributing their losses primarily to American numerical and material superiority. This failure to recognize and counter innovative enemy tactics was a recurring German weakness throughout the war's later stages. While the tactical success at Arracourt was undeniable, it came at a human cost that deserves remembrance. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion lost 14 men killed and 23 wounded during the September battles, including the 2 crew members from ambush who died in Leach's engagement. Each of these men was someone's son. Many were husbands or fathers. All had volunteered to serve their country in one of the war's most dangerous assignments. Tank destroyer crews had casualty rates second only to infantry among ground combat units because their lightly armored vehicles offered minimal protection while they faced the most dangerous enemy weapons. The men who served in these units knew the odds and accepted them, motivated by duty, patriotism, and the knowledge that their specialized mission saved the lives of other American soldiers. Lieutenant Leach survived the war and returned to Pennsylvania, where he completed his engineering degree and worked in civil engineering for 40 years. He rarely spoke publicly about his wartime service, considering himself simply a man who did his duty alongside thousands of others. In a 1987 interview for a military history journal, he reflected on the September 19 engagement. "We were scared kids doing a job that needed doing. I'm proud that my idea worked and saved American lives, but I'm prouder that my men had the courage to trust me and the skill to execute under impossible pressure. The real heroes were guys like the crew of Ambush who died doing their duty. I just happened to survive." This modest assessment was typical of his generation, men who accomplished extraordinary feats yet insisted they were ordinary soldiers doing what was necessary. The tactical innovations pioneered at Arracourt influenced armored warfare doctrine well beyond World War II. During the Cold War, NATO forces planning to defend Western Europe against numerically superior Soviet armor studied the Arracourt battle extensively. The concept of using terrain, preparation, and innovative positioning to defeat superior numbers of better-armed tanks became central to NATO's defensive strategy. Modern military forces continue to teach the Arracourt principles at armor and cavalry schools worldwide. Use terrain to your advantage, create overlapping fields of fire, maintain flexibility, and never assume enemy superiority is insurmountable. The battle is featured in military staff colleges as a case study in tactical innovation and junior leader initiative. The Battle of Arracourt itself remains one of WW II's forgotten victories, overshadowed by more famous engagements like the Battle of the Bulge or Market Garden. Yet military historians consistently rank it among the most significant armored battles on the Western Front. The lopsided casualty ratio, German losses of 280-plus tanks versus American losses of 48, demonstrated that by late 1944, American forces had achieved not just material superiority, but tactical and operational superiority over German forces. The battle also validated the tank destroyer concept, which had been controversial in American military circles. Critics who argued that tank destroyers were wasteful compared to conventional tanks were silenced by the results at Arracourt, where specialized TD units proved their worth in defensive operations. The story of Lieutenant James Leach and his ambush angle reminds us that warfare is as much about human ingenuity as material resources, and that courage comes in many forms. Leach's courage wasn't just the physical bravery to stand against enemy fire, though he certainly displayed that, but also the moral courage to challenge conventional thinking, to propose unconventional solutions, and to take responsibility for his men's lives when implementing untested tactics. His willingness to think differently, combined with the trust his crews placed in his judgment and their skill in executing his vision, turned a theoretical concept into battlefield success. The men who fought at Arracourt, on both sides, were products of their nations and their era, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances where split-second decisions determined life or death. As we remember these events 80 years later, the lessons remain relevant. Innovation doesn't always come from senior leadership or academic study. Sometimes it comes from junior officers in the field who see problems clearly and think creatively about solutions. Trust between leaders and subordinates enables tactical flexibility that rigid command structures cannot match. Superior technology can be defeated by superior tactics, training, and will. And most importantly, the courage and sacrifice of individual soldiers, men like the crew of Ambush who gave their lives, or men like Leach who carried the weight of command decisions, deserve our lasting gratitude and remembrance. The Battle of Arracourt was won by American material advantages, yes, but it was won equally by the courage, skill, and innovative spirit of men who refused to accept that German tanks were unbeatable. Their legacy lives on every time a military unit approaches a problem with creativity rather than rigid adherence to doctrine, and every time a junior leader takes initiative to protect the soldiers under their command. Lieutenant James Leach's ambush angle, initially mocked by skeptical fellow officers, destroyed 7 German tanks in a single engagement and helped turn the tide at Arracourt, one of WWII's most important yet least known armored battles. His story reminds us that tactical innovation, courage under fire, and trust between leaders and their troops can overcome even the most daunting odds. From the foggy hillsides of Lorraine to modern armored warfare doctrine, the lessons of September 19, 1944 continue to resonate. If this forgotten story inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold tales from WW1 and WWII. Next time, we'll explore another remarkable story of American innovation and courage, the medics of Bastogne, who saved hundreds of lives during the Battle of the Bulge despite being surrounded, outnumbered, and desperately short of medical supplies. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Let's close with General George S. Patton's words after the Battle of Arracourt. The 4th Armored Division is magnificent. Their tank destroyers are worth their weight in gold. The men like Lieutenant Leach and his crews embodied the American fighting spirit, innovative, determined, and deadly effective. We honor their memory and their sacrifice.